Okay. Welcome to the Sociology seminar series. It's really nice to see that quite a few of you made your way here. This is a kind of a new format, I suppose. More of like a discussion-centered format where we will have an input about 20 to 25 minutes, and then we will try to discuss about the issue. We'll see how that works in terms of the room later on. So as you can see, we have our own Sam Lawton here today. By the way, my name is Tim Winsler. For those of you who do not know me, I'm a tutor here in sociology. I also convene the seminar series. If you don't know me, you probably know me from my emails. So we have Sam Lawton here today. Sam is a colleague of mine, a fellow former PhD student, and you're moving beyond your PhD soon.
Yes.
Yes.
So I passed my binary in July.
Oh, congratulations for that. And he's a tutor here, and he wrote his PhD on bisexuality, and is also interested in the sociology of sexuality, bi and asexuality, sociology of gender, masculinities, and queer theory. But as you will see, he will talk about something rather broad today, which I'm sure will interest all of us, and we'll get into the discussion soon, which is called Positive Dispute, the Resolved Sociology Analysis of the Cambridge Analytica Scandal. Sam?
Thank you, Tim. So I'm going a bit off tack, really. I'm trying to dip my toe into political sociology. Obviously, when you study things like LGBT rights and LGBT experience, you sort of bar up against a lot of political issues. So this is kind of a political sociology that I've been trying to do my PhD. But I want to talk about an issue that I've been thinking about really since the scandal broke. For some reason, I found myself watching Christopher Wiley's testimony to the UK Parliament when he blew the whistle on Cambridge Analytica. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what Cambridge Analytica was and the kinds of things, the kind of implications I think it has for the social sciences broadly. So for politics, for psychology as well, because psychology is kind of at the heart of the Cambridge Analytica scandal. For academia specifically, because they were also, the word Cambridge is referring to the University of Cambridge, and they were sort of adjacently based at Cambridge and used quite a lot of the psychology department's techniques there. And I think it will have. I haven't really heard this scandal. I've been kind of, when you look at the kind of literature surrounding this, it isn't really. It's not. It hasn't been as discussed in sociology, so I kind of want to discuss it within a sociological context, I suppose. So what was the Cambridge Analytica scandal? So Cambridge Analytica was a data marketing firm founded by Nigel and Alexander Oakes and this kind of Bond villain-esque figure called Alexander Nix. The reason I call him a Bond villain is literally because in the testimony that I was referring to, in which I draw heavily on for this talk, he's actually there. Cambridge Analytica is equated with a fictional Russian spy agency in James Bond called Smersh. Literally, an MP refers to them as that. So Steve Bannon, who was Trump's ex-chief strategist, so the person who put Trump in the White House, and he's a former editor of Breitbart News, which has been described as the kind of Huffington Post of the right wing. So he was the former vice president of Cambridge Analytica. I think Christopher Wiley says Cambridge Analytica was essentially Steve Bannon and two other people, really. Even though a lot of the documentation that was leaked has a lot of different names, including just some interns who really didn't have anything to do with it. But its stated purpose was to change audience behaviour. So that is really ambiguous about what that is, but really what it is to manipulate elections. So that's the stated purpose of Cambridge Analytica. The pro-Brexit campaigns, unofficial pro-Brexit campaigns, were probably clients of Cambridge Analytica. Emma Bryant, who is a sociologist who had worked with some people in this department, she worked with Greg Philo, and she also worked with she's worked with Nick Watson as well on disability studies. But she has actually, and I'm going to show you the map of all the different elections that they've interfered with, because this is kind of like a global phenomenon, essentially. So she's done a lot of really good work of actually uncovering who the clients of Cambridge Analytica were, actually pouring through the leaked documents and things like that. And Leave.eu, who were not an official Brexit campaign, I think they received like something like 30 or 40% of their funding went towards Cambridge Analytica, so they just bought the services of Cambridge Analytica. So they employed a technique called psychographic microtargeting to swing the Brexit referendum, and as I mentioned, Christopher Wiley, who's a former employee, blew the whistle on them, and Carol Cadwalla of The Guardian broke the story. I think my next slide is about what the hell is psychographic microtargeting. So, if we break this down. Psycho means psychological, graphic, as in this is a portmanteau of psychological and demographic. And then we have micro, so it's being individually targeting people, and then it's just kind of like a targeted advertising. So it's a kind of a blend of lots of different things, really. So, let's see what my next slide is. Okay, so how do they actually use this? So, first, they create the personality profile of the people who are predicted to vote for Brexit. So this employed personality psychology, and which is a kind of a weird discipline anyway. It has a lot of strange origins and kind of like social Darwinism and things like that. That's quite interesting if you kind of look into the history of personality psychology. But it uses this model, which is the Ocean model. So this is, or sometimes called the 5-factor model of personality. So these are individual personality traits. They say that you can measure personality on basically these 5 traits. So it's openness to new experiences, or just openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. The O and the N are the most important for the Cambridge Analytica scandal. So they specifically targeted people who were highly open to new ideas and highly neurotic. So you might, when we talk about neuroticism in particular, when we talk about neuroticism in particular, this is people's susceptibility to mental illness, essentially. So they're targeting mentally ill people who are highly open to new ideas. They often are prone to conspiratorial thinking. So you could call these people sort of like schizotypical people in another way. That's like another way of putting it if you want to. They then identify the real people whose Facebook profiles, because when you're an advertiser on Facebook, you can you have a lot more options, and you kind of like can screen your audience essentially. So they target people whose Facebook profiles indicate that they match the psychological profile. I don't even know exactly how they did this, because I haven't like gone into the inner workings of Facebook and things like that to see how this works. But Step 3 is spamming these people with ads for Brexit relentlessly. So like a ridiculous amount of targeted advertising on this particular demographic of people. So this is just marketing, this is targeted advertising. We have targeted advertising in our lives all the time. And the side effect of this was creating an inorganic activist base. So this is in political science called astroturfing, where as opposed to grassroots, that's where there's a kind of play on words there. So it's astroturf instead of actual grassroots activism. So this had this side effect because the algorithm worked really well. Essentially, it was very effective, and it had a pretty high conversion rate for what it is. But I'm skipping ahead a little bit. And then step 4, the Brexit referendum was won. As I said, this wasn't an official Brexit campaign, but it was still working towards the political goal of Brexit. And we all know how the Brexit campaign went. So the question is, like, they did all of this stuff. A lot of money got thrown behind Cambridge Analytica. Did it work? I think it did. Wiley, who was the whistleblower, said it was really unprecedentedly successful. So I think the employees themselves of Cambridge Analytica were really surprised by how successful it was. So I mentioned conversion rates there. So what conversion rates are is not just clicking on a targeted ad, it's actually going out and doing something. So it's like becoming active in the Leave campaign, donating, going to meetings, sharing Brexit propaganda, those kind of things. We're not just talking about clicking on an ad, essentially. And conversion rates were as high as between 5 and 8% in some cases. So that's like 2 in every 25 people who are targeted, did something like donating, going to campaigns, going to meetings, sharing Brexit propaganda. They're doing something essentially to do with, that was pro-Brexit. So this also wasn't the first time that they'd used these kind of techniques. So they tested their techniques in formerly colonised places. I'm going to show you the map of all the different places. So, like in Nigeria, they shared really horrible content about political violence in order to suppress voting there. Really, like, awful stuff. And so they've been active before, and they've been kind of testing these techniques, but they were sort of gearing up to, to the UK and the US as well. So because Brexit happened by, I know it says a tiny margin there, it was by about 1.5 million votes, really, which is maybe not, maybe is not like such a massive margin, but they also did have millions of data points, and they did this quite a lot. I'm not saying they did it on everyone, because you can't do it on everyone, but I think it definitely had an influence in the Brexit campaign, and it was completely illegal. So this is from Emma Bryant's work. These are all the different things. So SCL here, Strategic Communications Laboratory, which is the same as Cambridge Analytica. Cambridge Analytica is essentially like a brand name, it's like a sub thing of SCL, who are they're like a private defence contractor, I suppose you could say that. But this shows just the extent of the operations that they've been running for a long time. And also, they weren't the first people to do this. So, like, big data science companies have been doing this. You might have heard of Palantir recently. This is all based on Palantir. You may have heard of Palantir recently because currently the government want to sell all the NH records to Palantir, or give them the contract to actually just give them the data management contract for the NHS records. So Dominic Cummings was really interested in and approached Cambridge Analytica about getting something like Palantir for voting, essentially, because they knew the kind of stuff that they had been involved in. We should be kind of critical of the whistleblower Christopher Wiley as a whistleblower. I think it's right to be kind of critical about some of his claims. So why should we trust anything he says? He's testified to the committee of MPs for 4 hours, which is basically what this is. Most of this is based on, and some of Emma Bryant's work as well. Outlined what Cambridge Analytica was and what it had done to the Brexit campaign. He testified to a House Select Committee in Washington. He's been questioned by the FBI and the National Crime Agency. He has also had his story corroborated independently by journalists at Channel 4 News and The Guardian, both of whom saw documents that corroborated the claims that he was making as well. So just a kind of short note about why we should maybe take seriously what he's had to say, and this wasn't just some kind of like the most elaborate job interview ever, essentially, when he was giving all these testimonies. Going to sort of change tack here into what does this mean for the kind of epistemology? Because I see the Cambridge Analytica scandal, and I see it as like a kind of a natural experiment, right? So you've got there's a lot of like positivist assumptions behind the kind of things, you know, that Cambridge Analytica is doing. So they're saying things like, you know, we can predict and manipulate voter behaviour, for example. And I think they have. I think they probably have. I would arguing that maybe not beyond reasonable doubt, but they are like this sort of like shows that some positivist assumptions about you know societies, the way people behave, psychology, are kind of like they're at least accurate enough as to influence, you know, a certain segment, you know, or to influence, you know, it's not like 100% conversion rates, the kind of things that they're doing, but they're certainly influencing it enough, you know, with, you know, thousands or, you know, hundreds of thousands of people, possibly, that I think this does show that some of these things are unfortunately correct. So, because I'm painting quite broad strokes here as well, I've included this Adorno quote here to sort of like recuse myself of any, you know, of people being too critical of me, I suppose. But Adorno says a degree of bad corruption is posited in all epistemology and even in criticism of it. So there we go. I'll kind of like move on. I've just got a few more slides and then I'll kind of like open this up. But I think that this is a sort of interesting thing that happened and sort of might settle a few arguments. This book that I've taken it from is The Positivist Dispute in German Sociology, which is Adorno just having an argument with Karl Popper, essentially. And then Habermas chips in as well. So, does this mean then, if positivism has been shown to be correct, does this mean that we should like abandon interpretivism and anti-positivism? Are we all going to have to really learn how to do stats and coding? And no, I think that would be kind of missing the point of what I'm trying to say. What it does mean though is that we can't attack positivism just for being untrue necessarily. I think there are certain things that hold water within it. Unfortunately, I think this is shown. Like I said, it's obviously to a certain extent, and that might be to a small but significant extent. But you can definitely still be an anti-positivist. I don't think this is a bust to interpretivism or anything like that, or qualitative sociology at all. Okay, so I think because people are being so manipulated and so black boxed, to quote the idea of like the black box essentially is a bit like the idea of the Skinner boxes essentially. The way that people behave on social media is very instrumental and operationist, you might say. I don't know if people know much about like behavioral psychology and things like that, but this was essentially the way that B.F. Skinner, this was kind of his paradigm in the 1920s, and it's a very cold, inhuman way of treating human beings or understanding human behaviour. I don't think that's true for how people actually behave, but I think it can become increasingly true when you put people in front of a screen and you put them in front of Facebook or something like that. Their behaviour gets kind of really quantified, it gets reduced, and it becomes operationalised and very operant and mechanised, I suppose. But I think because people are being manipulated in this way, and despite the fact that I think some Cambridge Analytica showed in some ways that positivist assumptions are kind of true to a certain extent, I think this is actually an argument for, not against, taking a more humanistic approach, a person-centered approach to sociology. I think it's more important that the way that we do work, whether it's qualitative or quantitative work, is to to try and work to empower people, working with our research. I know, like, many of you already do this already, but I think this is actually essential because of the way that people are being manipulated on such a mass scale as well, is to make what we have done. And I alluded to earlier the extent that people in the Cambridge Psychology department were really complicit with developing these kind of techniques. So they would go and they would ask them about, the most recent research that was coming out in order to actually make their algorithms better at manipulating people, essentially. I kind of had like a weird experience with this from my own, because I'm a psychology graduate, and I got offered a job with a company in Bath called Cognisis, who were developing things based on personality psychology and cognitive psychology, which was for recruitment, essentially. So recruitment programs are heavily influenced by psychological techniques and things like that. But I had a look at some of the materials, and they were essentially just using my whole psychology course to develop sort of recruitment products to sell to companies, essentially. And it was weird. I didn't take the job, but it was a very weird thing. And I think that it shows that things like psychology are really aligned or can be used for market purposes, essentially. That they're very aligned to capitalist stuff, essentially, in a way that obviously, sociology kind of isn't. So I think we need to kind of take these big, facts about, Cambridge Analytica, the global scale of the kind of election manipulation, undermining of democracies. I think we need to take it seriously, and I think we need to kind of account for it within our sociology. I think it's kind of important for us as sociologists to sort of take, or social scientists or whatever, however you identify, to take this stuff seriously. And this is a big problem. This is a big social problem that is happening. I don't think it's stopped just because Facebook was fined an enormous amount. I don't think any of this stuff is stopped. I think there are plenty of other companies that we don't know about, like Cambridge Analytica. Basically, if it can be done and it's been shown to be done and to work, like, everybody is going to try and get their hands on this kind of technology. Essentially, there are going to be people who are going to be trying to do this stuff. And like I said, it doesn't just apply, using the example from my kind of professional life, it doesn't just apply to things like voting. It applies to the ways that people are recruited, and a lot of different corners of social science, I would say. I think we have to kind of argue from for a humanistic, qualitative and quantitative sociology, treating the data that you're using as a product of real human experience rather than just as data, because the consequences, are human consequences. And I've got this quote by Adorno, where he's saying categories are only dealt with if they're no longer substantial, if they're no longer unquestionably alive. So in positivism, a historical condition of the mind is documented, which no longer knows experience and consequently eradicates experience and presents itself as a substitute. So he's talking about data, substituting human experience when it's actually kind of derived from it already. I think that, if you are a positivist, if you use quantitative data, even if you're doing it very critically and reflexively, which I think you should be doing, I think you have to treat the data that you're using as, like I said, a product of real human experience. So, I think I've got another slide which is kind of like a counterpoint to this, not to be arguing for horrible things, which I'll maybe talk about in a bit. But what does this kind of show about the nature of politics now? I think it shows that liberal norms established at the beginning of the 21st century in the 90s have been kind of slowly but surely eradicated. I think the rule of law is meaningless to the power elite. Maybe that has been all along. Maybe that's a kind of like a naive thing to say. Yeah, sure. And I think such data firms are tools at the disposal of charismatic leaders on the political right. I don't see this being taken up by the left anywhere. The kind of things, because I don't think they want to take these kind of very powerful tools up, essentially, because of their sort of dehumanizing nature. I'm going to skip that slide. And yeah, I want to ask some kind of provocative questions, I suppose. Does what is left of the left have to match the insidiousness of companies like CA, Cambridge Analytica, to actually gain any power? Basically, there's this huge political force which is against progressive politics. Does this show that we're essentially powerless now? Have people lost all control of their political lives? Is sociology failing by overlooking the consequences of tech firms like Facebook? What kind of things do you think? These are kind of provocative questions that don't necessarily reflect my actual positioning. But let's have a chat, I suppose. So I think that's everything.